Alright, welcome back to another video over here on SCS Combat, and today I'm going to be giving you my official prediction for the main event of UFC Rio coming up this weekend. Charles Olivera takes on Mateusz Gamrot. What a fight. We get the return of the Bronx Charles Olivera. He recently, as of today, actually changed his nickname to the Predator. I will call him the Bronx as he takes on number 8 ranked Mateusz Gamrot. Subscribe. We're here for live every weekend now, hopefully. We've got reaction videos, prediction videos, live streams, edits even, interviews, more of them to be coming on the way soon. So make sure to subscribe, get back here, check it all out now. Obviously we all know last time out, Charles Oliveira knocked out cold brutally in the first round by Ilia Topuria, who has since went on to become the pound for pound #1 fighter in the world. Mateusz Gamrot, on the other hand, coming off the back of a decision win against Ludwig Klein, and then before that there, I think it was his loss to Dan Hooker. Obviously that loss to Dan Hooker was a close fight, back and forth, but at the end of the day Dan Hooker just got the better of the striking on the feet and was able to outpoint Gamrot, and that is also what Gamrot's known for, is kind of a decision fighter. You see on his record in his last couple of fights have all been decisions. It said he knocked out Fiziev or TKO'd Fiziev, obviously, because it just gives you the stat, and I went and watched it back and then remembered that was the fight that Fiziev done his leg in. Fiziev hurts his leg and goes down, and then the ref stops it after a couple of ground and pound shots. So that was kind of the last stoppage on Gamrot's record. Now obviously for Oliveira, we've already said what his last fight was like. Before that he actually beat Michael Chandler, and then before that there was the close loss to Arman Tsarukyan. The biggest problem in this fight is the fact that Charles Oliveira was knocked out brutally 4 months ago. Obviously Charles Oliveira is widely known for having a good chin. Came up against probably the hardest hitter in UFC at the moment, Ilia Topuria, one of the best boxers in the UFC, and obviously Charles walked straight onto the shot, let's be honest here. The biggest concern of them all is what's his chin going to be like upon return. Now obviously I've mentioned previously in this video that Gamrot isn't necessarily the hardest hitter. At the same time, the area where it could get risky in is if Oliveira gets Gamrot in a submission when Gamrot shoots for the takedown. As we all know, Gamrot's loves his wrestling. Let's just say, for example, Charles Oliveira goes for a guillotine and then Gamrot gets out of it and starts laying down some nasty elbows and ground and pound. He mightn't hit as hard on the feet, but anyone regardless can hit hard with elbows on the ground if they know what they're doing. So that's obviously the main concern. Could he get caught out on the ground with ground and pound? But I suppose a part of that sequence that I just mentioned is a key to victory for Charles Oliveira. So try and snatch the neck of Gamrot as he shoots in. I watched his last fight against Klein there, and a couple of the takedowns, his head's open for a guillotine on the way down. He's got the most submissions in UFC history. So yeah, but Charles Oliveira is obviously known as an expert on the ground with submissions, rear naked chokes, guillotines, arm bars. You see that one against Tony Ferguson where he near broke Tony Ferguson's arm. The only fighter ever probably that wouldn't have it in that position. Shout out to Tony Ferguson. On the feet, from what I seen in Gamrot's last fight there, it was kind of the flurry to get on the inside to shoot in the takedowns, and that could be a reason why maybe he doesn't hit as hard, because whenever a fighter flurries like that, you're not fully standing your ground, based and throwing hard shots. You're just kind of throwing distractions out to get the takedowns. It'll be interesting to see what way Gamrot approaches this fight. Does he believe he can subdue Charles Oliveira's jiu-jitsu with his wrestling game, or will he be more tentative on shooting those takedowns in case he gets caught? In my opinion, that's going to be the main thought in his mind. If you're going up against a fighter like Charles Oliveira, a submission specialist, especially as another grappler yourself, you will definitely be thinking about, is he going to catch me with something here on the way in? The other thing for Gamrot is he has a good chin. We all seen that Dan Hooker fight, but at the same time, we all know Charles Oliveira isn't just a submission specialist because he hits hard. You see that fight with Justin Gaethje, even though he submitted him, he dropped him with a shot to get into that submission. And that's obviously another worry for Gamrot. If you get dropped by Charles Oliveira and you're stunned a bit, then maybe you're not fully near out, but you're just stunned, he could take it back in a split second and that could be it over. I have also seen in that, Gamrot does stand his base of points and throws hard shots, right hands, head off the center line. It's going to be really interesting to see how Charles Oliveira approaches this fight, because I do feel like his team and him are smart enough to know that doing a war on the feet isn't the play here. Not even a war, but just spending the majority of the time on the feet probably isn't a good idea. Another thing, Gamrot's a really good wrestler, and Arman Tsarukyan, his main skill is wrestling, and he was able to outdo Charles Oliveira and win by a split decision in their fight. This one though, over 5 rounds compared to that 3-round fight. Obviously, as I've said, Gamrot flurries to shoot in on the legs, obviously the wrestling. Ground and pound shots could be huge. People really can ignore it if it's their favourite fighter, or they just don't think about it, but fighters don't have recovery, and especially after a career like Charles Oliveira's where you've been hit by some of the hardest fighters. Charles Oliveira, and although he beat them, has fought the likes of Justin Gaethje, Poirier. Obviously, he fought Max Holloway back in the day. Islam dropped him, I believe, into the submission as well. He has took severe punishment over his career, and then obviously knocked out cold by Ilia Poirier in his last fight. Fighters coming back this quick from knockouts it doesn't tend to end well for them. Particularly, obviously, in the case of Alexander Volkanovski going up to lightweight, taking on Islam on short notice, and then getting knocked out, going back down to featherweight for what I believe was 5 months later, and getting knocked out again. That just shows, Nikita Krylov, whenever Dominic Reyes knocked him out cold earlier this year, he fought Bogdan Guskov. 3 months later, knocked out again. I suppose in the case of Charles Olivera, I mean, let's be honest, Mateusz Gamrot is right here. He's right where he wants to be, and this is his opportunity. The big fights have slipped out of his fingers, maybe just barely. You look at that Dan Hooker fight, maybe he's number 5 ranked after that. Maybe he already was, and he could be next to the title if he wins that, but of course he lost. This is his shot. This is his shot back for the title. This is his shot back to the big names in the division. You look at after this, maybe he could face the likes of, Dan Hooker's fight Norman Sirkin. You got Paddy the Baddy is there to be matched up. That could be a good fight to determine who fights for the title next after Hooker Sirkin. This is his ticket back to what he's probably dreamed of his whole life. Charles Olivera, on the other hand, we all know the story. The thought of quitter, the underdog, and then one day that switch just flicked, and ever since then he's been a straight destroyer. Charles Olivera has that reputation. It's the main event in Rio. This could be his final fight, if we're honest. Does he really feel like he can get that title back after this? And does he see the point in fighting? Yeah, I mean, look, a long fighting career for Charles Olivera, 35-11, man. He has got the 4-inch reach advantage, though, and in my opinion, that helps a lot. Gamrot 25-3. In my opinion, that reach advantage 3.5 inches. If Charles can use his boxing and keep Gamrot at his range, then that opens up for Gamrot to not stand and throw hard shots, but more of them flurry shots I was talking about to get on the inside. Then Charles Oliveira can maybe take him down, get a submission, or maybe he'll catch the neck on one of those submissions or on one of those takedowns. The comeback kid, the Bronx Charles Oliveira taking on Mateusz Gamrot. Who do I have to win? I'm pretty sure by watching this video you can tell I've got pretty good arguments of why Gamrot could win. But all of that being said, there's always something about a Charles Olivera fight, and there's always a feeling that he's just gonna pull it off. This is the moment. This is UFC Rio, potentially the last fight of his career, to send it off on a good note. This could be it for Charles Olivera, and if this is in his head, his last fight, that he's gonna give it everything he's got. So, in my opinion, if it will be the last time, and we'll be live, so subscribe, come back here and check that out, because we will be live for this fight. We're going with the Bronx one more time, Charles Olivera. We're going to be representing Brazil that night. We're going with Charles Olivera to get the win, and I'm going to take him to get the win by submission via guillotine. Whenever Gamrot shoots the takedown, I think he might get that in too tight. The adrenaline, everything he had put into it, I think he'll be able to get Gamrot into submission that he can't escape, whether it be that guillotine, that darce, or maybe a rear naked choke off a knockdown. So that is going to be my pick for this fight. We're going with the Bronx Charles Olivera to beat Mateusz Gamrot. Like, subscribe, and follow for more. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok.